you wrote a lot about how the word atheist is still important to you. We should use that word. We should lean into that word. How
Yeah.
important is that? Because every survey that I've seen in the past, however long, I mean, it's one thing for demographers, if that's the right word, to say nuns, NONES,
Yes.
unaffiliated, whatever. And I don't care. It's all lumping into the same group. But why is it important that people use the word atheist more than just I'm not religious, some
Mm-hmm.
nebulous term?
Yeah. That's a great question. I guess there's a couple reasons for me. And one is I don't think that nuns are necessarily all atheists. I think that if what we're talking about here and what I'm talking about is not believing that there's a supernatural being in charge of the universe, not believing in a conscious deity, someone who is listening to your prayers. Um, and I think that there's lots of nuns who are just not affiliated with a particular religion, but they still have this idea that there's a higher power. And so partly I think people should clarify, just so that we actually have a sense of who out there believes in God, and a God who is, has certain rules, and, who believes that.
Let's
Um,
talk about the political aspect of that because you
yeah.
mentioned that earlier. Obviously, the religious right is kind of a pretty strong voting bloc. The
Hmm.
Republicans kind of have them. Democrats, even though most people who are non religious vote for Democrats at about the same level, roughly 80%, give or take, in the past couple of elections, even if more people came out as atheists, I'm wondering, would that translate into political power in any way when it comes to church state separation, civil rights, things like that? How important is it that people share that label? Or I don't know, have we hit the peak of that already? Is there a way to corral all these people under the
Hmm.
same umbrella? Because, I mean, the joke is it's like herding cats, but I guess the question is, if we all have this in common, um, atheism has been a hard thing to unite people under. It's a
Right.
lot easier for us to say, well, look at what the religious right is doing, whatever
Right.
their new label is.
Right.
Let's fight against that. And on
Right.
that front, we can get a lot more allies too.
Yes.
I don't really know what the question is. I'm just wondering
No. I think
why
this
is that
is great.
important?
Yeah. Yes, and there is the fight against. There's the fight against. And so what are atheists for? What is the positive way of um of thinking about our belief system, which is really just, okay, this thing is made up. In some ways, it doesn't seem like that important. But what I learned over the years, or what I realized over the years, was that if you start with the idea that there is no higher power, there is no God in charge, there is no afterlife, where injustices will be, rectified. Logically, you're going to end up in a place where that to fix anything in your community, in your country, to fix anything, humans have to do it without the higher power. You've got to use human power. And I think that is the positive stance of the atheist, this acknowledgement that we're it, that life is short, and that anything that we think is wrong about the world around us, or anything, anyone who needs help, or anything that needs to be done, it's on us, and of course you can ignore that. People ignore that, and also, of course, people of faith also take matters into their own hands. They don't always just rely on God or on prayers. But I think they're acting like atheists.
this
So
is this is one thing. I mean, I have talked about this when I've given public lectures
yeah.
and stuff, but it's it's a huge shift for me in how atheists have started talking about politics in the
Right.
past decade or so, which is it went from very much let's get atheists elected to office, which I still think is a good idea by and large. And it has shifted to, you know what, let's just work with allies who may be
Yeah.
religious in order to stop Christian nationalism. Let's
Yeah.
push for church state separation, against discrimination against people regardless of their beliefs or non-beliefs. And you talked about you talked about that change as well in the book. Like, what do you see as the future of that partnership? Because there are some
Mm.
atheists who think, if I am an atheist, I'm good. Like, I don't want to work with religious allies. Shouldn't we? I mean, aren't they still wrong? Why are we working with them? What is the importance of putting aside our
Mhm.
theological differences and working with
Right.
those other groups?
I was at a event the other day, and someone asked a question about why evangelicals voted for Trump, even though he's clearly not a believer, and he's why. I was my fellow panelist was an evangelical Christian.
Wait, but he held out a Bible in front of that church
Yeah,
after
right,
cleansing out
exactly.
the people.
I think the question was for her, but I was like, "Can I take this one?" Because I I said I would vote for someone who is religious, but who shares my values, just because, people have this other concept of reality doesn't mean that they don't share my politics, and that to me that's what's important. And there's absolutely times, and Americans United for Separation of Church and State often does this, where the fight against these new laws that are very religious in nature. The fight happens with a coalition of religious people. I'm just a little leery, and it goes back to your previous question. Um, I'm leery of this idea that the only people who have the moral authority to fight are, clergy. Only rabbis, only if you have reverend in front of your name or something, do you have that moral authority.
Yeah.
So,
I
I
have
mean,
not seen progressive groups or Democrats kind of embrace that. Like, there are no humanist chaplains speaking at those rallies
right.
alongside reverends and stuff. And it's not that we don't have them, but it is
Yeah,
interesting that what hasn't changed yet, and I'm surprised
right.
it hasn't, is politicians who are Democrats have not even tried really to reach out to non-religious voters, possibly because they just don't know who to talk to, but also they're not really making the argument that we don't care what you believe, we are here to defend your right to believe it. And
Right.
if you are non-religious, there's plenty worth fighting for. I'm shocked that they don't go out and make that case more strongly, because the other side simply can't. And
Well,
also, to your point about voting, it's like, yeah, I've voted for religious people in every
sure.
election for every position. Like, I found a way to do it. It's been okay.
Right. Um, I think that this goes back to your previous question too. They need to know. Politicians need to know. People on our side need to know how many atheists there are out there. And that is just another reason why I'm really pushing people to self-identify, because the more people, the more those numbers rise. And I think they will rise, not by my convincing anyone not to believe in God, but by my convincing people to acknowledge it, and then by them convincing other people. So I think that though, if those numbers rise, and if it's not some kind of vague, well, this 4% people say they're atheist, and however many say they're agnostic, and then they're the unaffiliated, and then they're all the people who are affiliated that I think they're out there in their pews thinking things like, it's a metaphor.
Yeah.
It's not really literally true. It's a metaphor. if we can get those numbers to rise, I think politicians will start seeing that and maybe acknowledging themselves when they're not believers, and maybe having just slightly less patience for any policy argument that starts with, God, God's will, God's law,
And I see plenty of that on the other
yeah,
side, and I'm
yeah,
surprised how many religious people seem not as bothered by that as I think they should be, because
right.
if Republicans get what they want, plenty of those religious people are going to be left out in the cold.
Right. And here is where, the good religion, the good religious people, the people who are on our side politically, here's where they have a little culpability, I think, where, or maybe not even culpability, but maybe there is a certain permission that's granted, I think, by even good religious people who sort of tolerate the bad stuff more than they should,
Yeah.
or at least see a kinship, or at least, and I think that's a little
I
bit
wish
of
more
the
pastors
problem.
would I wish more
Yeah,
pastors would speak out against it, especially in those churches where you have a lot of those people. It's
right,
like it's one thing for them to believe that stuff and speak out, but also, hey, it would mean a lot more coming from the pulpit, and that doesn't mean you're endorsing a candidate. It means you could speak in favor of your faith-based values
right,
and also challenge
right.
that.